Today's composer is Beethoven, Ludwig van Beethoven, German composer, born in the city of Bonn in Germany, which, by the way, much later became the capital of West Germany when, after World War II, before Germany was reunited. He was born in 1770, lived till 1827, and came at a time of transition in classical music. Music was moving away a little bit from the relatively restrained style of the late 18th century, the kind of music of his immediate predecessors, Mozart and Haydn, moving into new directions in harmony, in form, in emotional context, which would later be called music of the Romantic era. And Beethoven was one of the foundations of that. As Mozart and Haydn, he also worked in the city of Vienna. I mean, he was German, he was not Austrian. The others were Austrian. So was Franz Schubert, his contemporary, who worked in and composed in Vienna at the very same time. His music has been popular from his time onwards. There's something in his music that has spoken to humanity, if you want to call it that way, and that's why we hear his music so often. Yet he was the most disturbing force to hit music when he came on the scene compared to that earlier style, both as a performer and as a composer. As a performer, and he was a pianist, even some of the pianos of his time, especially the ones made in Vienna, could not actually take physically his playing. It is known that he left some broken hammers and strings on some of these pianos. He later acquired an English Broadwood instrument, which was a little bit sturdier and more suitable to what he was doing. Also, I want to mention one other thing, that some of you think. We all sort of are aware that Beethoven was deaf, but I want to make a point. He was not born deaf. He became deaf later on. He became deaf, but he could still hear things in his inner ear. And a little bit of an aside here, a number of years ago, I read an article. It was a kind of a medical analysis of what doctors think the kind of deafness he had. And the interesting conclusion in that article was it could have been cured by modern medicine, whatever it was. Well, how would that have affected his compositional abilities? We can only speculate, but it is an interesting fact. So do remember that he was not born deaf. That developed later on. So he wrote quite a number of compositions, and among the most popular ones that are probably the most often performed are his 5 piano concertos, his violin concerto, chamber music works like his piano trios and his string quartets, sacred works like the Missa Solemnis and the Mass in C, and most importantly, the 9 symphonies and the 32 piano sonatas. The piano sonatas are the bedrock of the piano repertoire. He wrote them throughout his entire life, and you can trace his development as a composer, if you like, by simply analyzing these and seeing how his thinking developed. Now, the sonata as a form was something that had been already codified and developed in the previous era. Mozart and Haydn pretty much had established it. An instrumental form, usually in 3 movements, and a movement is like an act in a play. It's a complete piece, it's a beginning, middle, and end, but it's not the complete composition. You still have to tie it together with a second and a third movement or whatever. Then you have the complete piece. Just like you go to a play, you have to see all the acts. The usual pattern was that the first movement would be quicker in tempo, the second would be slow, and the third would be quick again. Fast, slow, fast. So he was very symmetrical. He had balance and contrast. But Beethoven began to develop this into different directions, because many of his instrumental works were in the sonata form, whatever they were called, concerto, symphony, piano sonata, but the form was pretty much. But he began to move away from some of that. He wrote 4-movement sonatas. He wrote 2-movement sonatas. He rearranged the order of the movements in the 3-movement ones, something different. So he was an innovator. And yes, he did write standard 3-movement sonatas as well. Or the 32 piano sonatas, as I say, are the bedrock, the foundation of the piano repertoire. And anyone who studies piano beyond the totally elementary level will very likely study something from the Beethoven sonata, some movement, something, because there's so much there musically and technically. You can spend a lifetime, studying them, and some Beethoven specialists have indeed done that, and we're still finding new things in those things. I've played all these 32 at one time or another, so I know I'm quite intimately acquainted, with these particular pieces. Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play for you what is the most famous sonata by Beethoven. The Sonata Quasi una Fantasia in C sharp minor, opus 27, number 2. You're already looking blankly at me. What on earth is that? You said it's the most famous? I never heard of it. You probably haven't, not by that title. But I'm giving you the correct title. What I'm telling you now is the correct title of what we know as the Moonlight Sonata. The Moonlight Sonata. But this is the way it's properly titled. Sonata Quasi una Fantasia. In the manner of a fantasy, opus 27, number 2. By the way, the one just preceding it, in a sonata in E flat, opus 27, number 1, has the same title. Now, here he was an innovator. I already said how the movements were normally designed, fast, slow, fast. The famous movement that most people are familiar with, that slow movement, that's the first one. But by the rules of the sonata structure, a slow movement should be in the second position. But no, here it's in the first position. Innovator. Yes, it's in 3 movements. The second movement here is very short and acts really kind of elegant and acts as a bridge from that famous first movement to the final movement, which is really the most important movement. Very stormy, very energetic, very passionate, and it's actually the most powerful final movement that he wrote of any of his sonatas up to this point. It's a couple of years later when he wrote the sonata in F minor, opus 57, the one that we call the Appassionata. Then that kind of outdid this one. But that was later on, but up to this point. Now, of the 32, this one is number 14, so it's right in the middle. It's right in the middle. Why is it called Moonlight? That's not Beethoven's nickname. A couple of years after Beethoven's death, this nickname came into being. The German literary critic, writer Ludwig Relstab, he came up with this name because he thought that the mood of that first movement reminded him of moonlight on Lake Lucerne in Switzerland. So in German, Mondschein, moonlight. And so we use that name all the time. But I've given you the proper name, Sonata Quasi una Fantasia in C sharp minor, opus 27, number 2. Okay, so I'm going to play that for you right now. Well, you've now heard a complete Beethoven sonata. There are only 31 more to go? No, not today. Some other time. Have a nice day. Hope you enjoyed it.